No doubts. And I saw their first gig at the Red Cow in Hammersmith in '76, and there was a little bit of a buzz about this band who'd come over from Australia. People had heard TNT, bought TNT, an import in fact, and there was a little bit of a buzz going about this band who'd come over and were over here now and were going to tour and really make it. And when they came on stage for that first show at the Red Cow, there weren't very many people there, but they just came on with a sort of, you know what, this is the birth of a legend. We're prepared to play for you lot like you're 50,000 people because we know one day it will be, as indeed it has been. So from day one, they didn't have the problem. They'd done it before. They knew they could do it. And they also had so much confidence in themselves, not overconfidence, confidence, and immediately made an impact. As soon as they appeared on stage, that was it. The buzz grew.
The music scene in Britain at the time was on the brink of the punk rock explosion. And AC/DC unwittingly found themselves being bracketed with the likes of Johnny Rotten.
When AC/DC arrived in the UK, that was just the dawn of the Sex Pistols and all that sort of stuff. So they were kind of a bit confused with that, you know, in the marketplace. But I think the thing was AC/DC were traditionally hard-playing band, which couldn't be said for lots of the punk bands, that's for sure. So, you know, they could clean the floor with them in terms of, you know, rocking out. They just left people, you know, speechless, really.
Like we honestly thought that the punk and the new wave thing might sort of spoil a bit for us, but it hasn't at all, you know?
Yeah.
It was a big fad, like it's just like anything else, big fad for a while, and there's those that are still hanging on to it. But the main thing about it is that it gives rock music a real kick in the guts, you know?
Yeah.
And we sort of, even though we started the whole thing over here, like we played here before the Sex Pistols were even sort of, you know, thought of.
Yeah.
And now we've always been there, and people are beginning to realise that now they want more than just someone up there screaming, you know, anarchy and rape and this sort of, you know, crap, you know. And we're it. Yeah. We're doing it right.
In May, AC/DC released their first official UK album, the British High Voltage, an amalgam of their previous two Australian LPs. They quickly gained the support of the British music press and did a 20-date tour supported by Sounds magazine. In August, they toured Europe with Ritchie Blackmore's Rainbow before releasing a new album in Australia, Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap.
Dirty Deeds was the most honed record they'd made to date. You know, they were starting to get on top of, you know, really making records. And so, you know, deservedly so, it was the most honed record they'd made to that time. And it contains some absolute classics. I've always contended that most of their albums are a bit bitsy. Most groups have a bit bitsy, but if you get 3 or 4 or 5 great tracks, you're really on a winner. And Dirty Deeds did that at least, you know, where the previous albums might have had 1 or 2 good single, bit of filler, you know. Dirty Deeds, it really started to come together.
Some of the early AC/DC music, despite being sort of powerful rock, is very soulful. It has to be said. And I mean, in fact, if you listen to Ride On, it's one of the most sublime pieces of blues guitar playing that you'll ever hear, and I don't think Angus has ever been accorded the credit. Big Balls is hilarious. I mean, that's just, you know, because Bon loved to write tongue-in-cheek, and nothing, I don't think AC/DC ever did was quite as tongue-in-cheek as that. Maybe it was considered a bit too simplistic, but I mean, you know, there's a rock bar down the road from where we're sat now, and it's got every Bon Scott AC/DC album on the jukebox, and Big Balls comes on all the time. People love it.
While Dirty Deeds performed well back in their homeland, AC/DC embarked on a tour playing larger venues in Britain. It culminated in the renowned performance at the Hammersmith Odeon.
Hammersmith Odeon was fantastic. Hammersmith Odeon was the culmination of the tour, and it was almost the culmination of this phase of their career. They'd made it this far to the famous Hammersmith Odeon stage, and they looked at home on a big stage. They took it in their stride, and of course Bon marching out into the audience with Angus on his shoulders playing guitar and marching up to the circle and so forth was just fantastic. It was wonderful, and they really took to it like a duck to water. They understood what was required on a big stage. They performed, they filled the stage, and not with effects, not with gimmicks. It was with the 5 of them and their backline. They just filled the stage and they made a roaring, raucous sound, and everybody there just went, yeah.
In December, the band returned to Australia to begin a 2-leg comeback tour. Yet the climate had changed and they were portrayed as obscene punk youths in the national media. Several dates were cancelled, and even Australian Parliament began discussing their effect on the morality of the young.
punk rock was happening. It was all the big, you know, tabloid beat-up punk rock, you know, spitting on audiences and all that sort of crap that went with punk, you know. And so AC/DC were kind of involved in that, or you know, by implication in the UK. And they had never had that association in Australia, but, you know, they went away, punk rock kind of explodes. The Sex Pistols were on the front page of the newspapers here, just as they were in the UK. Our punk band, the Saints, go off to the UK, but AC/DC come back, and so in that meantime, the tabloids here have gone, oh, well, they're a punk rock band because that's what we understand now, so we're going to hound them as a punk rock band. And that was it. I mean, the media was after some punk. It's just really that simple. The media was after some punk rock sensation. By this time, Angus had introduced his kind of, his mooning routine. I mean, ban them for that. Oh, it's fair enough, really, when you think it's disgusting. Yeah, so it was just nothing. It was a total beat-up, and it was actually something that really served to alienate the band. They really did feel this is tin pot, and they went back to the UK and said, well, you know, we'll leave that behind us now. It's a really small pond, and they were right, I think.
The band remained in Australia to record their next album, but after performing gigs in February 1977. This incarnation of AC/DC would never officially play live in their homeland again. "1977 would be a momentous year for the band. Not only did it see them tour Europe with Black Sabbath and later travel to America, it saw the release of their most honed and impressive work to date, Let There Be Rock.
Let There Be Rock is my favourite AC/DC album. Just shading Highway to Hell and Power Age. They're all great from that era, but Let There Be Rock's personal favourite. What they did, they made another leap. It's interesting because they made the leap to Dirty Deeds, which put them on a much more of an international scale. I think with Let There Be Rock, they made an album for America. Not excluding the rest of the world, but they looked at America and said, we've really established ourselves in the UK, America is next, and we have to make an album that's going to really get the point across. And from the title track through to Crab City in Blue, all the album is aimed at America.
Let There Be Rock, I reckon, is their best album. It's my favourite AC/DC album, and it was the second last one that George and Harry did, I think, at that time. But look, yes, Let There Be Rock. Conspicuously, one of the things that's kind of happening there is Let There Be Rock marked a bit of a shift where they became, that was more like an album band album. Well, Highway to Hell is a great album, and so is Back in Black. But Let There Be Rock was the first one where they made an album that just hung together perfectly like an album. And the title track, Let There Be Rock, is just, you know, it's one of the great sort of rock tracks of all time to me.
Let There Be Rock itself was very much about the birth of American rock and roll. It was great, and it's such an epic and a tremendously climactic song. But the whole thing was they moved up another gear. With every release, they were moving further forward.
In July, the band embarked on their first US tour and continued their tradition of playing anytime, anywhere, starting at the very bottom with the goal of getting to the top.
They had already succeeded in the UK, they had succeeded in Australia, they had a fan base in Europe, but America was the big one. And they understood from day one, if you're going to do well in America, you don't go over and play New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, Boston, and about 5 or 6 other metropolitan centres. You go and you tour. You play everywhere. You go and play to the Hicks. You play the Backwoods. You go everywhere in America. You do every tour possible and get yourself across. And they worked very hard for a few months and didn't stop. And they went out there with a determination, we're going to come home with a foothold, or more than a foothold, in the United States. And they did it. And that's their work ethic.
AC/DC had a very strong working class ethic. And their working class ethic was that they were on the road to garner fans around the world, and they believed, and rightly so, the only way they would do it is by live performances, because they were, you know, a fucking good rock and roll band. End of story.
During the first leg of this momentous tour, they were approached by Kiss bassist Gene Simmons to support his band on tour later in the year.
He came along to our show or one of our shows in the Whiskey in Hollywood to see us play, you know, and he come up to us and said, look, I dig your band, and we're touring in December, and we'd like you to tour with us, you know. And they played to 80,000 people.
Yeah, right, I mean, they're huge.
So the show should be quite amazing.
The tour was a success, and playing with such reputable acts gave the band a platform through which they could increase their growing fan base. On their return to Australia, they recorded Power Rage, another raw, brutal classic.
It kicks ass. It's probably the best Bon Scott album. You know, as good as Highway to Hell is, and it's a great record. Power Rage is the definitive Bon Scott statement. They're all smoking. The band are on fire. I mean, I bet it didn't take long to record. I think they must have just gone in that studio and just cut loose. And you can hear it. It's got a frantic energy to it. And there's one throwaway song on that record at all. It's just, for me, every single song absolutely nails it. It's just terrific fun to listen to.
The album was their most commercially successful so far, and AC/DC decided to return to the US to keep up the momentum, playing with the likes of Alice Cooper, Aerosmith and Van Halen. It was during this 62-date tour that Bon Scott's friends and family became concerned about the singer's lifestyle.